the forests of northern Thailand, there is said to be a village that does not appear on any map. A place where the ground is always soft, and the villagers follow a rule they never dare to break. After sunset, no one is allowed to dig the earth. Because beneath the soil of Ban Phra Chan, something has been buried for generations, something that feeds on the dead. And every 30 years, the village must perform a ritual that no outsider should ever witness. Tonight, we tell the story of Buried Alive. Chapter 1. The Village That Does Not Exist. Deep in the northern forests of Thailand, beyond the paved roads and the last flickers of mobile signal, there is said to be a village called Ban Phra Chan. Few maps acknowledge its existence. Fewer people dare to speak about it. The road that leads there is nothing more than a narrow strip of red dirt winding through endless bamboo forests. The bamboo stalks grow so thick that they form a living wall on both sides of the road. When the wind passes through them, they knock against each other with hollow, clattering sounds, like bones gently tapping in the dark. Travelers who pass that road often say the forest feels wrong. Too quiet. Even the insects fall silent as the sun begins to sink behind the trees. At the entrance of the village stands an old wooden shrine covered in faded cloth and incense ash. A cracked stone statue sits inside, half buried in moss and mud. No one remembers what deity it once represented. But every evening, someone still lights incense there. Not to pray, but to appease something. Ban Phra Chan itself is small, barely 20 wooden houses scattered across uneven ground. The buildings lean slightly, as if the earth beneath them has shifted many times over the years. Which, according to the villagers, it has. The soil in Ban Phra Chan is strange. It is dark, soft, and always damp, even during the hottest days of the dry season. Older villagers say the land is soft because it has been dug too many times. But they never explain what was buried. Or who. There is only one rule that every child in Ban Phra Chan learns before they even learn how to write their own name. A rule spoken quietly but obeyed without question. After sunset, no one must dig the earth. No gardens. No wells. No graves. If the ground must be opened, it must be done before the last light disappears behind the trees. Because once night falls, the villagers believe the earth beneath Ban Phra Chan is no longer empty. Something below the soil begins to stir. And the elders say that if anyone dares to disturb the ground after dark, they might hear knocking. Soft at first. Slow. Then desperate. Not the sound of wood. Not the sound of stone. But the unmistakable sound of human hands clawing at the inside of a coffin. And in Ban Phra Chan, when that sound begins, no one ever digs down to see who is knocking. Because everyone in the village already knows the truth. Some things buried beneath the earth were never meant to wake again. Chapter 2. The Grave Digger. Somchai had spent most of his life digging graves. In small villages scattered across northern Thailand, death was never far away. Old men died quietly in their sleep. Children sometimes vanished in the jungle. Accidents happened on lonely roads where no ambulance would ever arrive in time. When someone died, families called Somchai. He dug the earth. He lowered the coffin. And then he left before the morning prayers ended. It was a simple job. But over the years, Somchai had learned something strange about graves. The earth always felt different depending on what rested beneath it. Some graves were heavy with silence, as if the soil itself wished to keep it secret. Others felt hollow, loose, like the ground had not yet accepted the body buried inside. Still, nothing had ever frightened him. Until the day he was called to Ban Phra Chan. The message arrived through a nervous young man who refused to meet Somchai's eyes. An old man died this morning, he said quickly. The village needs someone to dig the grave. Somchai asked the usual questions. How old was the deceased? Where should the grave be prepared? When would the funeral begin? But the young messenger only answered the last one. Before sunset. That part was not unusual. But when Somchai arrived at Ban Phra Chan later that afternoon, something about the village made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. No children were playing outside. No dogs barked. Even the wind through the bamboo sounded strangely muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The villagers watched him from their doorways as he carried his shovel toward the small cemetery at the edge of the forest. Their eyes were not grieving. They were afraid. The cemetery was nothing more than a clearing surrounded by tall bamboo. The graves were uneven and oddly spaced, many of them sunken slightly into the earth. Somchai chose a spot the villagers pointed to and pushed his shovel into the soil. The blade sank easily. Too easily. The ground felt loose, recently disturbed. Somchai frowned. "That's strange," he muttered. He dug again. And again. The soil came away quickly, as if someone had already opened this grave not long ago. Then the metal edge of the shovel struck something beneath the dirt. Clink. Not stone. Not wood. Somchai knelt and brushed the soil away with his hands. Something dull and green emerged from the earth. A bracelet. Old. Tarnished. Still wrapped around a human wrist. Somchai froze. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he slowly uncovered the rest of the arm. The skin was pale. The fingers were stiff. And the nails? They were packed with dirt. Behind him, one of the villagers gasped. Another whispered a prayer under their breath. Somchai turned to them, his voice low and cold. This grave was already used. No one answered. But the expression on the village elder's face told him something far worse than that. This was not an old grave. And whoever lay beneath the soil had not been meant to be found.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Coffin Beneath the Soil. The forest clearing fell into a heavy silence. Somchai knelt beside the half-dug grave, staring at the pale arm emerging from the soil. The bracelet still clung tightly around the wrist, its metal surface dull with age and moisture. But the flesh did not look old. It looked recent. The villagers behind him shifted uneasily. No one stepped forward. No one offered an explanation. Somchai wiped the dirt from his hands and spoke slowly. "Bring me a lantern." No one moved. Finally, an elderly woman shuffled forward and placed a trembling lantern on the ground beside the pit. The orange flame flickered in the growing dusk, casting long, shaking shadows across the bamboo trees. Somchai climbed down into the shallow grave. The earth was loose, far too loose for a burial that should have happened years ago. With each scoop of soil he removed, the smell of damp wood and something faintly rotten rose into the evening air. Then his shovel struck something again. This time it was unmistakable. Wood. A coffin. The top of it had already begun to rot from the moisture of the soil. Thin cracks ran along its surface like veins. Somchai swallowed. "Who was buried here?" he asked. No one answered. He brushed away more dirt until the entire lid of the coffin was visible. Then he noticed something that made his stomach twist. The wood was scratched. Not by animals. Not by tools. The marks were long, uneven, and desperate. Deep grooves carved into the inside of the lid from below. As if someone inside the coffin had tried to claw their way out. Somchai hesitated for a moment. Then he pried the lid open. The wood cracked with a sickening sound. The smell that escaped was thick and damp, but not the smell of long decay. Inside the coffin lay the body of a young woman. She looked no older than 20. Her black hair was tangled across her face. Her clothes still mostly intact, though stained with mud. Her skin had turned a pale gray beneath the lantern light. But what made Somchai's heart pound was not her face. It was her hands. Both of them were curled tightly, fingers bent and twisted. Her nails were broken. And beneath them was packed dark soil. Somchai felt a chill crawl slowly up his spine. This girl had not been peacefully laid to rest. She had been buried alive. Behind him, the villagers began whispering frantically. Someone started crying. The village elder finally stepped forward, his voice shaking. "You shouldn't have opened it." Somchai turned toward him. "Who is she?" The old man's face had turned as pale as the corpse in the coffin. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he whispered something that made the air in the clearing feel suddenly colder. "She was the offering." And somewhere beneath the quiet earth of Ban Phra Chan, Somchai could have sworn he heard something else. A faint sound. A dull, hollow knock. Coming from somewhere deeper underground. Chapter 4. The Village's Dark Secret. The wind began to move through the bamboo forest again, producing a slow, hollow rustling sound that echoed around the cemetery. Somchai climbed out of the grave slowly. The image of the girl's broken fingernails still burned into his mind. Behind him, the coffin remained open. The lantern light flickered across the young woman's face, making her closed eyes appear as though they might suddenly open at any moment. Somchai turned toward the villagers. Their faces were pale. Some avoided looking at the grave entirely, staring instead at the darkening sky as if praying the night would arrive faster. Only the village elder remained standing near the pit. His name was Prayat, and he looked far older than the rest of the villagers, his back bent. His skin wrinkled like dry bark. Somchai pointed toward the coffin. "You said she was an offering." The old man closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he spoke in a quiet voice that sounded as though it carried the weight of many generations. Ban Phra Chan was not always a cursed place. The villagers slowly gathered closer, their uneasy whispers fading. Long ago, Prayat continued, this land was built on forest that should never have been cleared. According to the elders, the ground beneath the village had once been sacred to something older than the temples. When the first settlers arrived decades ago, they cut down the trees and built their homes without asking permission from the spirits of the land. For a while, nothing happened. Then the deaths began. Animals were found torn apart in the jungle. Children disappeared. And sometimes, at night, villagers claimed they could hear strange knocking sounds beneath the soil, as if someone, or something, was trapped deep underground. The elders consulted wandering monks and spirit mediums. One of them finally spoke the truth the villagers feared. The land was home to a hungry spirit of the earth, a being that lived beneath the soil and fed on human suffering. If it was not satisfied, it would take its payment in blood. At first, the villagers tried prayers, then offerings, then animals. But the spirit remained restless. Until one night, a medium revealed the ritual that would quiet the spirit. A sacrifice. Not death. Something worse. Someone had to be buried alive beneath the soil. Their fear. Their pain. Their desperate struggle for breath inside the coffin. Those things, the medium said, would feed the spirit and force it back into sleep. Somchai stared at the old man in disbelief. You're telling me this village murders people every few decades? Prayat's voice trembled. We do not choose lightly. But you still choose. The old man lowered his head. The ritual only happens once every 30 years. Somchai turned slowly toward the open coffin again. So she was the last one? Prayat did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the dark forest surrounding the village. His eyes were filled with a fear far deeper than guilt. Finally he spoke. Yes. Somchai felt a cold wave pass through his chest. Then why? He asked quietly. Does it sound like something else is still knocking underground? The villagers froze. Because in the sudden silence of the cemetery, they all heard it. A slow, hollow sound beneath the earth. Thud. A pause. Then again. Thud. As if something deep below the village had just begun to wake up.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Moonlit Offering. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. For several seconds, no one in the cemetery dared to breathe. The lantern flame flickered violently in the wind, casting restless shadows across the bamboo trees. The open coffin beside the grave seemed darker now, as if the earth itself were trying to swallow the sight of it again. Somchai was the first to speak. You said the ritual happens every 30 years. Prayat nodded slowly. Yes. Somchai looked down at the young woman's body in the coffin. Then why was she buried so recently? The old man's hands trembled. Because the spirit grew hungry earlier than expected. A murmur spread through the villagers standing behind him. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others stared at the ground as if they feared it might open beneath their feet. Prayat continued, his voice barely louder than the rustling bamboo leaves. For months before her death, the village began to feel wrong. Animals stopped coming near the forest. The soil around the houses began to sink in strange places, leaving small pits in the ground as though something beneath the village had shifted. And every night, just before midnight, the villagers heard the same sound. Knocking. Slow. Patient. Waiting. At first, they believed it was only the wind striking buried roots or hollow stones beneath the soil. But then one night, a farmer digging near the edge of the forest claimed he heard something far worse. A faint voice. Not loud. Not clear. But unmistakably human. It sounded like someone whispering through layers of dirt, begging to be released. That was when the elders decided the ritual had to be performed again. They chose the girl in the coffin. Her name was Molly. She had no family left in the village, which made the choice easier for everyone else. Somchai felt his stomach twist. You buried her alive because it was convenient. Prayat looked up sharply. No, the old man whispered. We buried her alive because if we did not. He gestured slowly toward the forest surrounding the cemetery. The spirit beneath the earth would come for all of us. Somchai scoffed. Spirits don't claw their way through dirt. But even as he said the words, something cold passed through the air. The bamboo forest suddenly went silent. No wind. No insects. Nothing. Then, somewhere far beyond the cemetery, a distant sound echoed from the darkness. Thud. The villagers turned toward the forest instantly. Thud. It came again. But this time, it was not beneath the cemetery. It was moving. Slowly. As if something buried deep under the ground was dragging itself through the soil. Coming closer. Prayat's face turned pale. That shouldn't be possible, he whispered. Somchai stared into the darkness between the bamboo trees. The sound came again. Closer now. Thud. Then something else followed it. A faint scraping noise. Like fingernails dragging through packed dirt. And suddenly Somchai understood something that made his blood run cold. The ritual had not satisfied the spirit beneath the village. If anything, it had only woken something far worse. Chapter 6. The Next Chosen One. The sound beneath the forest floor faded slowly into the distance, leaving behind a silence so heavy that it pressed against Somchai's ears. No one spoke. The villagers stood frozen around the open grave, their faces pale in the weak lantern light. Some clutched small wooden amulets around their necks. Others whispered prayers under their breath. Somchai finally broke the silence. That thing, whatever it is, it's not sleeping. Prayat's eyes remained fixed on the dark forest. I know. The old man's voice trembled in a way that made Somchai uneasy. Then the ritual failed, Somchai said. Prayat slowly shook his head. No. Then explain what we just heard. The village elder hesitated. His gaze moved from the forest, to the open coffin, and finally to the villagers gathered around them. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. The spirit has awakened before. Somchai frowned. And what did you do? Prayat closed his eyes. We gave it another offering. A murmur of fear rippled through the villagers. Some began shaking their heads violently. No, one woman whispered. We can't do that again. But Prayat did not look at them. His gaze moved slowly toward the center of the crowd. Toward a young girl standing near the back. She couldn't have been older than 18. Her name was Lada. She had been silent the entire time, watching the open grave with wide, terrified eyes. When she noticed the villagers slowly turning toward her, confusion spread across her face. What? Then realization struck. Her breath caught in her throat. No. The word escaped her as a broken whisper. Prayat stepped forward, his face twisted with pain. The spirit is awake, he said quietly. If we do not calm it again, the earth will open and swallow this village. Lada backed away, shaking her head. You promised the last ritual would be the final one. Somchai felt anger surge through him. You're going to bury another person alive? he demanded. Prayat's eyes were filled with tears now. We have no choice. Lada turned to the other villagers desperately. But no one stepped forward to help her. Their fear was stronger than their mercy. Her voice cracked as she screamed. You're all murderers. The forest suddenly stirred again. The bamboo groaned as a cold wind pushed through the trees. Then the sound returned. Thud. Closer this time. Much closer. The ground beneath their feet trembled faintly. A thin crack appeared in the soil near the open grave. Something beneath the earth moved. Prayat's voice dropped to a whisper. It's coming. Lada began sobbing. No, please, don't do this. But Somchai noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The dirt near the coffin was shifting. Slowly. Like something below was pressing upward. And for a brief moment, Somchai thought he saw a pale hand pushing against the soil from beneath. The spirit was no longer waiting. And this time, it might not be satisfied with just one victim.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The Night of Burial. Night fell over Ban Phra Chan like a heavy curtain. The moon rose slowly above the bamboo forest, its pale light spilling across the village in cold silence. Under that ghostly glow, the villagers gathered near the edge of the cemetery. No one spoke loudly. Even the wind seemed afraid to disturb what was about to happen. In the center of the clearing stood the coffin. It was newly built from rough wooden planks, the nails hammered in hastily as if time itself were running out. Beside it stood Lada. Her hands were bound tightly with rope. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt. Somchai stood several steps away, fury burning in his chest. This is madness, he said. But no one answered him. Prayat approached the coffin slowly, holding a small bowl of ash and incense sticks. He muttered ancient prayers under his breath, words that sounded older than the village itself. The villagers knelt. Some cried quietly. Others refused to look at Lada at all. The ritual had begun. Somchai stepped forward. Stop this. Two men grabbed his arms immediately. You don't understand, one whispered. I understand perfectly, Somchai snapped. You're burying a living girl to feed some story your ancestors invented. But even as he spoke, the ground beneath them trembled again. Not violently. Just enough to make the lantern flames shake. A thin crack slowly spread across the dirt near the open grave. The villagers gasped. Prayat's voice rose louder now, chanting urgently. The earth spirit demands peace. We return the breath of life to the soil. Lada struggled against the ropes. Please, she cried. Her voice broke into desperate sobs. I don't want to die like this. Somchai tried to break free from the men holding him, but their grip tightened. The villagers lifted Lada and placed her inside the coffin. The sound of her body hitting the wooden bottom echoed through the clearing. She began pounding on the sides instantly. No, please, let me out. The lid was lowered. Her screams became muffled. Somchai shouted again. You're killing her. But the nails were already being hammered in. Bang! 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 Each strike of the hammer drowned out Lada's cries a little more. Then the coffin was lifted and lowered slowly into the open pit. For a moment, everything stopped. Only the sound of Lada's fists pounding desperately against the lid could be heard. Thud! 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 Then the villagers began shoveling dirt. The first pile of soil struck the coffin lid with a dull sound. Inside, Lada screamed. The sound turned into frantic pounding. Faster. Harder. Thud, thud, thud. Somchai felt sick. But the villagers kept digging and throwing dirt. More soil. More darkness. Until finally, the coffin disappeared beneath the earth. For several long seconds, the pounding continued beneath the ground. Then it grew weaker. Slower. Desperate. Until at last, there was only silence. The villagers slowly stepped away from the grave. Some fell to their knees. Others stared at the soil with hollow eyes. Somchai's chest tightened. He thought it was over. Then the ground beneath the grave moved. Not sinking. Rising. A faint sound came from beneath the soil again. But this time, it was not just one pair of fists. It sounded like many hands knocking from below. And somewhere in the darkness beneath Ban Phra Chan, something had just been set free. Chapter 8. The knocking beneath the earth. No one moved. The villagers stood frozen around the fresh mound of dirt, staring at the grave where Lada had just been buried. For a moment, everything was silent. Too silent. Even the bamboo forest surrounding Ban Phra Chan had stopped whispering in the wind, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then it came again. Knock. Soft. Muffled. From beneath the soil. Several villagers gasped at the same time. Somchai's heart began to pound violently in his chest. The sound came again. Knock. This time it was clearer. Not a random movement of wood. Not shifting dirt. It was deliberate. A slow, hollow impact against the inside of the coffin. Lada was still alive. Somchai rushed toward the grave. "She's alive," he shouted. "We had to dig her out." But before he could reach the mound of soil, several villagers grabbed him again. "You'll anger the spirit," one of them hissed. Somchai struggled violently. "She'll suffocate." From beneath the earth, the knocking grew louder. Thud. 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 The sound was frantic now. The desperate pounding of someone trapped in total darkness. Dirt shifted slightly on the surface of the grave with every impact from below. Inside the coffin, Lada was fighting with everything she had left. The villagers turned away, covering their ears. Some began crying. Others whispered prayers, rocking back and forth in fear. Prayat stood perfectly still. His face looked carved from stone. "This is necessary," he said quietly. Somchai felt rage explode through him. "You're monsters." The pounding continued. But something about the rhythm began to change. Somchai noticed it first. The sound was no longer just coming from one place. It was spreading. Another knock echoed from deeper underground. Then another. And another. Thud. 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 The earth around the grave trembled faintly. Small cracks began appearing in the soil. One of the villagers screamed. "Listen." Somchai did. And what he heard made his blood turn cold. The knocking was no longer just beneath Lada's coffin. It was coming from every direction beneath the cemetery. From old graves. From deep underground. From places where no one had dug for decades. It sounded as if dozens of coffins buried beneath Ban Phra Chan were suddenly alive with movement. Hands. Clawing. Pounding. Begging to escape. The ground shifted again. Dirt slid slowly down the side of Lada's grave. Then something pushed upward from beneath the soil. A pale shape. For a split second, Somchai thought he saw fingers breaking through the dirt. Prayat staggered backward, his voice filled with horror. "That's not possible." Somchai turned toward him. "What did you do?" The old man stared at the trembling earth in disbelief. The offering was supposed to calm the spirit. Another violent knock exploded beneath the ground. But this one didn't come from the coffin. It came from somewhere deeper. Something far older. And far stronger. The earth cracked again. And suddenly Somchai realized the terrifying truth. They had not fed the spirit beneath Ban Phra Chan. They had awakened everything buried beneath it.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The grave that opened from below. The ground exploded. Not violently like an earthquake, but with a slow, sickening shift that made the soil around the cemetery buckle and sink. The villagers screamed and stumbled backward as cracks spread across the earth like black veins. Somchai barely kept his footing. The mound of dirt covering Lada's coffin trembled violently. For one desperate second, hope flickered inside him. Maybe she was still alive. Maybe she had found a way to push the lid open. "Move," Somchai shouted. He grabbed a shovel and rushed toward the grave. But the moment the blade touched the soil, something beneath the ground pushed upward. The dirt bulged. Then collapsed inward. The grave opened. Not from above. From below. The soil sank into a hollow space beneath the coffin, pulling the wooden box down into darkness. The villagers watched in horror as the grave slowly swallowed itself. The coffin disappeared completely. Somchai dropped to his knees at the edge of the pit and looked inside. There was no coffin anymore. No sign of Lada. Only a deep, unnatural tunnel leading into the black earth. Cold air rose from it. And with it came a smell that made Somchai gag. Rotting flesh. Wet soil. And something older. Something that had been sealed underground for a very long time. Behind him, the villagers began shouting in panic. The grave collapsed. No, look. Somchai turned. More cracks were spreading across the cemetery. One of the older graves suddenly caved inward. Its wooden coffin lid snapped open as the soil shifted. Something inside moved. A hand slowly pushed through the dirt. The skin was gray and peeling. The fingers twisted as they clawed upward. Someone screamed. Another grave collapsed. Then another. The cemetery had become a field of broken earth and open pits. Bodies began emerging from the soil. Some were little more than skeletons wrapped in scraps of cloth. Others were horribly preserved, their pale skin stretched tight across sunken faces. But the worst part was this. They were moving. Slowly. Dragging themselves upward with stiff, jerking motions. Somchai staggered backward, unable to believe what he was seeing. This can't be real. But the villagers already knew the truth. Prayat's voice cracked as he whispered the words no one wanted to hear. The earth spirit? He looked at the crawling shapes emerging from the graves. Was never alone. Another figure suddenly pulled itself from the ground near the center of the cemetery. Unlike the others, this body looked almost intact. Mud-covered hair hung over its face. Its fingers dug into the soil as it slowly rose to its knees. Somchai's chest tightened. Because he recognized the torn dress. Recognized the rope marks around her wrists. It was Lada. Her head slowly lifted. Her eyes opened. But the eyes staring back at the villagers were not human anymore. They were dark. Empty. And filled with something ancient. When she spoke, her voice sounded wrong. Like several voices whispering through the same mouth. You buried us? The ground beneath Ban Phra Chan began to tremble again. And this time, something far larger was rising from the darkness below. Chapter 10. The one who walked out of the grave. The cemetery had become a nightmare made real. Graves lay shattered across the clearing. The soil torn open as if the earth itself had rejected what had been buried within it. Pale hands clawed their way through the dirt, dragging rotting bodies slowly into the moonlight. The villagers screamed and fled in every direction. Some tripped over broken gravestones. Others collapsed in terror as the dead began pulling themselves free from the soil. Somchai stood frozen. His eyes were locked on the figure rising from the center of the cemetery. Lada. Mud covered her hair and face, dripping slowly down the front of her torn dress. The ropes that had bound her wrists still hung loosely from her arms. But her body moved in unnatural ways. Her limbs jerked stiffly as she stood, like a puppet struggling against invisible strings. For a long moment, she simply stared at the villagers. Her head tilted slowly to one side. The moonlight revealed her face. Her skin had turned a sickly gray beneath the dirt, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. But the worst thing was her eyes. They were no longer the frightened eyes of the girl Somchai had seen hours earlier. They were black. Completely black. As if the darkness beneath the earth had filled them. One of the villagers fell to his knees. Molly? The name spread through the crowd in terrified whispers. Molly. The girl from the coffin Somchai had uncovered earlier. The first offering. Lada's head slowly turned toward the man who had spoken. When she smiled, her mouth stretched wider than it should have. You remember her? Her voice echoed strangely, layered with other voices beneath it. Some sounded young. Some sounded old. All of them sounded like they were speaking from deep underground. You buried her beneath the soil. Her arm lifted slowly. Her finger pointed toward the villagers. You buried all of us. The earth trembled again. Behind Lada, more figures crawled out of the broken graves. Some dragged shattered legs behind them. Others moved on stiff arms like insects clawing through dirt. Their empty eyes stared at the villagers with silent accusation. Somchai felt cold terror crawl up his spine. "This isn't the spirit you were feeding," he said quietly. Prayat's face had turned completely white. "No." The old man staggered backward. "The spirit beneath the earth doesn't create the dead." Another grave suddenly burst open. A skeleton forced its way upward through the dirt. Lada turned slowly toward the old man. The dark eyes locked onto him. "Not the spirit." She took one slow step forward. "The victims." The ground beneath the cemetery split open again with a deep cracking sound. A long fissure tore through the soil, revealing darkness far below. Cold air rushed upward from the depths. And with it came a sound that made every villager freeze. A low, rumbling breath. Something enormous was moving beneath the earth. Somchai stared into the widening crack in horror. Because the dead crawling out of the graves were not the true nightmare. They were only the beginning. Whatever lived deep beneath Ban Phra Chan was finally rising to claim the village that had fed it for generations.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Thing Beneath the Earth. The crack in the ground widened slowly. At first it was no wider than a hand, a thin black line cutting through the soil of the cemetery. But with every second that passed, the earth continued to split apart. The sound it made was unbearable. A deep grinding noise, like massive stones dragging against each other somewhere beneath the village. The villagers backed away in terror. Some ran toward the forest. Others collapsed where they stood, paralyzed by fear. Somchai stared into the growing fissure. Cold air rushed out from the darkness below, carrying with it the heavy stench of rot and wet earth. But there was something else in that smell. Something ancient. Something that had been buried for far longer than any grave in the cemetery. Then the breathing began again. Slow. Heavy. Like a creature inhaling for the first time in centuries. Prayat fell to his knees. "No," he whispered. "This can't be happening." Somchai grabbed the old man's shoulder. "You said the ritual fed the spirit beneath the earth." Prayat's eyes were wide with terror. "That's what we were told." "Told by who?" The old man's voice shook violently. "The mediums, the wandering monks, the old stories passed down from the first settlers." Another violent crack split the ground open. The fissure was now large enough to see movement within the darkness. Something was shifting deep below. Not rising quickly, but slowly pushing upward through the soil, forcing the earth apart as it moved. The dead surrounding the cemetery suddenly stopped crawling. Every corpse turned toward the fissure. Even Lada. Her black eyes stared down into the darkness. Then she began to laugh. It was a dry, broken sound that echoed across the cemetery. "You thought the offerings were for the spirit." Her voice carried the whispers of dozens of buried souls. But the spirit never asked for them. Somchai felt a cold wave run through his body. Then why did the ritual exist? Lada's head tilted slowly. To keep it asleep. The ground shook again. A massive shape pressed against the walls of the fissure below. The soil crumbled away as something pushed upward. Prayat began shaking uncontrollably. "We fed the dead to the earth." Lada's smile widened. "You fed the earth to it." A long, gray limb suddenly forced its way through the crack. It was enormous. Thick as a tree trunk. Its surface looked like hardened clay mixed with rotting flesh. Dozens of pale human hands were embedded within the surface of the limb. Their fingers twitching weakly. The villagers screamed. The arms slammed against the sides of the fissure, pulling the creature's body higher. More of it began to emerge from the earth. A head slowly rose into the moonlight. It had no eyes. Only a wide opening where a mouth should be. Inside that hollow darkness, Somchai saw movement. Human bones. Skulls. Hands. Hundreds of them. The thing beneath Ban Phra Chan had been feeding for generations. Not on blood. Not on flesh. But on the bodies of the buried. And now, after decades of offerings, It had grown large enough to crawl back into the world. Lada turned toward the villagers one last time. Her voice whispered through the night. You buried us to keep it asleep. The creature's enormous body continued rising from the earth. But now, the ground beneath the village shook violently. It is hungry again. Chapter 12. The village begins to fall. The creature continued rising from the earth. Each movement forced more soil and broken graves aside as its massive body pushed upward through the cemetery. The ground shook violently now, throwing villagers to the dirt as the crack widened into a deep chasm. Somchai stumbled backward, unable to tear his eyes away from the nightmare unfolding before him. The thing was enormous. Its body looked like a mass of hardened soil fused with rotting flesh. As if the earth itself had grown around the corpses buried beneath the village. Pale human arms protruded from its surface in twisted shapes, their fingers twitching weakly as though they were still trying to escape. The creature dragged itself halfway out of the fissure. Its hollow mouth opened wider. Inside the darkness, bones shifted and clattered together like a pile of broken teeth. Then it inhaled. The sound echoed across Ban Phra Chan like a deep cavern breathing. And suddenly, the ground beneath the nearby houses began to collapse. Wooden walls cracked. Roofs slid sideways as the soil beneath them sank. One of the villagers screamed as his house tilted and dropped into a newly opened pit. The village was falling apart. It's taking the land with it, Somchai shouted. Prayat was still kneeling in the dirt, staring at the creature in absolute despair. We were supposed to keep it asleep, he whispered. But we only made it stronger. Another violent tremor shook the ground. The creature pulled itself further out of the earth, dragging a long body behind it that seemed to disappear endlessly into the darkness below. Lada stepped slowly toward the edge of the chasm. The other dead followed her. Dozens of pale figures now surrounded the creature like silent witnesses. Somchai realized something terrifying. They weren't attacking the monster. They were watching it. As if it were the master of the grave that had created them. The creature moved again. Its massive arms slammed into the ground beside the cemetery. The impact shattered gravestones and sent dirt flying into the air. Another house collapsed in the distance. Villagers ran toward the forest, screaming in panic. But the forest itself began to tremble as well. The roots of the bamboo trees ripped free from the soil as the ground shifted beneath them. Ban Phra Chan was breaking apart, slowly being swallowed by the earth that had hidden the monster for generations. Somchai grabbed Prayat and forced the old man to stand. You started this ritual, he said. There must be a way to stop it. Prayat looked at the towering creature, his face filled with hopeless fear. There was only one rule in the old stories. Somchai shook him. What rule? The old man's voice cracked. If the earth spirit ever wakes. Another massive tremor shook the village. The creature's body continued pulling itself from the ground. The one who feeds it must take the place of the dead. Somchai felt a chill run through him. You mean someone has to be buried alive again? Prayat slowly nodded. But this time, his trembling eyes turned toward Somchai. Because the villagers had already chosen the next sacrifice.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The village turns on Somchai. The ground continued to tremble beneath Ban Phra Chan. Houses collapsed one by one as the earth shifted and cracked. The bamboo forest bent violently in the wind, its tall stalks knocking together like hollow bones. Above the cemetery, the creature dragged more of its massive body from the chasm. Every movement caused the soil to sink deeper, swallowing pieces of the village into the widening abyss. Somchai looked at Prayat in disbelief. You think I'm going to let you bury another person alive? Prayat didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the surviving villagers gathered at the edge of the cemetery. Their faces were pale with terror. Some clutched their children. Others stared at the creature rising from the ground. But slowly, their eyes began turning toward Somchai. One man stepped forward. He's the outsider. Another villager nodded. The curse began when he dug up the grave. That's right, someone else said. He woke the dead. Somchai felt a knot tighten in his chest. "You're blaming this on me?" The villagers did not respond. But they began moving closer. Prayat's voice shook as he spoke. "The old stories say the sacrifice must be someone connected to the awakening." Somchai took a step back. "That's just your fear talking." But deep down, he could see the truth in their eyes. Fear had already decided. Another violent roar echoed from the creature. It slammed one of its enormous arms into the ground again, sending a shockwave through the cemetery. Graves shattered. The earth sank deeper. The monster's hollow mouth opened wider as if tasting the air. The villagers panicked. "We don't have time," one of them shouted. "If we don't bury someone now, the whole village will die." Several men grabbed Somchai before he could react. He struggled violently. "Let go of me." But desperation made them strong. They dragged him toward the open chasm where the ground had collapsed earlier. Someone brought the coffin meant for the ritual. The same one Lada had been buried in. Somchai's voice filled with rage. "You're murdering me to save yourselves." Prayat approached slowly. Tears ran down the old man's face. "I'm sorry." But Somchai noticed something strange. The dead surrounding the cemetery were no longer watching the creature. They were watching him. Lada stepped closer. Her dark eyes locked onto Somchai. For a brief moment, something human flickered across her face. Then she whispered something so quietly that only Somchai heard it. "You are not the one it wants." Somchai's breath caught. "What do you mean?" But before she could answer, the villagers forced him down into the coffin. The lid slammed shut above him. Darkness swallowed everything. The sound of nails being hammered into wood echoed around him. Bang! 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 Then the coffin began to move. The villagers were lowering it into the ground. Somchai pounded against the lid with all his strength. "Stop!" But the sound of dirt falling onto the coffin quickly drowned out his voice. Outside, the creature roared again. The ground shook violently. And beneath the soil of Ban Phra Chan, Somchai realized something horrifying. The thing rising from the earth was not reacting to the sacrifice. It was moving toward him. Chapter 14. The Final Burial. Darkness swallowed Somchai completely. Inside the coffin, the air was already thick and damp. The smell of raw soil seeped through the wooden cracks as dirt continued to fall above him. Thud! Another heavy pile of earth struck the lid. Somchai pounded against the wood with both fists. "Let me out." His voice sounded small inside the narrow box. The coffin walls pressed tightly against his shoulders. Every breath he took felt heavier than the last. Above him, the villagers continued shoveling dirt. He could hear them moving. Hear their hurried footsteps. Hear their terrified whispers. Then the pounding from the creature shook the ground again. The coffin jolted violently as the earth trembled. Somchai felt the soil around him shifting. The monster was closer now. He could feel it. Somewhere beneath the layers of dirt and roots, something enormous was moving through the earth toward him. Then suddenly, the digging above him stopped. For several seconds, there was only silence. Somchai held his breath. Something had changed. Then he heard screaming. Not his own. The villagers. Dozens of voices shouting in terror. The ground shook violently again. So hard that loose dirt began spilling into the coffin through the cracks. Somchai froze. Then came the sound. A deep, grinding movement beneath the soil. Not above him. Below. Something was digging upward. The creature had reached the grave. The coffin suddenly tilted as the ground beneath it collapsed. Somchai slammed against the wooden side as the coffin slid downward into darkness. Then everything stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. A cold, foul wind seeped through the coffin. Somchai slowly realized the horrifying truth. The coffin was no longer buried in soil. It was suspended in an open space. A hollow chamber beneath the village. Then something scraped against the outside of the coffin. A massive shape moved in the darkness. Somchai heard bones grinding together. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Then a heavy object touched the lid above him. The wood creaked under the weight. Somchai stopped breathing. Outside the coffin, something enormous was examining it. Then he heard a voice. Not from above. From below. Lada. You see now. Her whisper echoed through the underground chamber. Somchai's voice trembled. What does it want? The creature moved again. The coffin shifted as the massive body circled around it. Lada's voice answered softly. It doesn't want the village. Somchai felt cold dread crawl through him. Then what does it want? For several seconds, there was only the sound of the creature breathing. Then Lada spoke again. It wants the one who opened the graves. The wood above Somchai suddenly cracked. A massive claw pierced through the lid of the coffin. Cold air rushed in. And the creature beneath Ban Phra Chan finally found the man it had been waiting for.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. 30 years later. The coffin shattered. Wood splintered as the creature's enormous claw tore through the lid, ripping it apart like thin paper. Cold air flooded into the narrow space as Somchai screamed and tried to push himself backward. But there was nowhere to go. The chamber beneath Ban Phra Chan was a hollow grave filled with the bones of those buried for generations. And now he had become one of them. The creature's massive head lowered toward him. Up close, it was worse than anything Somchai had imagined. Its body was not flesh. It was made from the soil of the village itself, packed with bones, rotting limbs, and fragments of skulls fused into its surface like fossils trapped in mud. Hundreds of pale hands twitched across its body. Some reached toward Somchai weakly, as if begging for help. Others clawed desperately at the creature's hardened skin. Inside the monster's hollow mouth, Somchai saw what remained of the victims. Bodies crushed together. Skeletons shifting slowly as the creature breathed. Lada stood nearby, her dark eyes watching him silently. You woke it, she whispered. Somchai shook his head desperately. I didn't know. But the creature didn't care. Its enormous claw wrapped around Somchai's body. The pressure was crushing. Bones snapped. Somchai screamed once. Then the creature pulled him into its hollow mouth. The sound of bones breaking echoed through the underground chamber. Then everything went quiet. Above the surface, the ground slowly closed. The fissure sealed itself. The dead bodies collapsed back into the soil. And the creature beneath Ban Phra Chan sank once more into the depths of the earth. The village was silent again. The survivors rebuilt what remained of their homes. And the old ritual returned. The elders told the new children the same rule that had existed for generations. After sunset, no one must dig the earth. Because beneath the soil, something was sleeping. Something that fed on the buried. Something that must never be awakened again. For 30 years, the village lived in uneasy peace. Then one afternoon, a stranger arrived. He was a gravedigger. His name was Somchai. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, staring at the ground with confusion. I've never been here before, he said. But the old woman standing beside him only smiled. Because deep beneath the earth of Ban Phra Chan, something enormous shifted in its sleep. Waiting. Hungry. And ready to wake again. Some say Ban Phra Chan still exists somewhere deep within the forests of Thailand. Travelers who pass through the area sometimes claim they hear strange knocking sounds beneath the ground late at night, slow, hollow, and desperate. But the villagers will never dig to find out what lies beneath. Because they already know the truth. And if the earth ever opens again, someone will have to be buried alive. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more dark legends and terrifying tales.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.